Hello and welcome to Three Skulls Tavern. I'm your host, Matt, and I'm joined today by, as you can see, arrayed around me, five very special guests as we're doing the first solo roundtable. Well, I hope to be the first of many solo roundtables. Um, Before we go around and do some introductions, just a quick introduction to the show if you're not familiar with it already. Three Skulls Tavern is a YouTube channel that I control, I guess, for want of a better word. I'm a big fan of the Year Zero engine by Free League out of Sweden, and I've been running actual plays, designing my own games with the Year Zero engine. And fairly recently, as I've been doing some design work on two of my games, I've been really inspired by kind of the solo gaming boom that has been happening, especially this year, which we'll talk about. And have been doing a lot of thinking about and discussions with people about how best to implement solo tools in the games I'm creating. And as I've been doing a lot of dev diaries and stuff on the channel, it kind of struck me that it might be a cool idea to get some other solo creators on and pick their brains and talk about their process and and solo gaming in general. So that's how this came about. I'm not a solo game creator myself. I'm hosting this roundtable. But I do have a very keen interest in it. So that's me. That's why I'm here. And welcome everyone who's taken the time to join live. And apologies for the sort of last minute change in time. Thankfully, we've got quite a few people watching now, so that's all good. So why don't we go around and do a set of intros. So just kind of tell us who you are. What games you've created, because this is obviously looking at all of you as game creators, especially what kind of solo stuff you've done and like what you're currently working on would be kind of nice. So we're gonna go, I think, clockwise from me on the Zoom, which is gonna look different for everybody because that's how Zoom works. Unfortunately, everybody's in the second position, probably at the top in the middle, right? So from me clockwise, we'll go over to Jammi.
Yes, me. All right. So, hi, my name is Jammi. I use they, them pronouns. And I've been working on games for like almost, I want to say like a year and a half now-ish. I can do math. Oh, no, it's closer to 2 years. Yeah, that's right. I started with the Sad Mecha Jam on itch.io. So it's been about almost 2 years since then. Time has been really weird this year, huh? But anyway, so I think people know me mostly from the fact that there was a time I was putting out 2 to 3 games a month. I've really slowed down lately because I'm working on bigger projects right now. But the biggest ones I'm working on right now are Apocalypse Keys and Balikbayan. And Apocalypse Keys is a PPTA game deeply inspired by Hellboy about monsters holding back the apocalypse. Balikbayan is a cyberpunk game that focuses on Filipino folklore because I'm from the Philippines. I forgot to mention that. But in terms of solo stuff, I really got into it thanks to the itch.io scene. I'm sure we're going to get into that later. I think my biggest solo games are We Forest 3, which is kind of like a choose your own adventure going through a forest where you meet different creatures from Filipino folklore. And In the Light of Death, the Demon Cries, which, I cried while making it, and some people cried while playing it. So I feel like that's kind of a good sign. But yeah, that's me and solo games. I really love the idea of it, and I'm super excited to talk about it today. Thanks for having me on, Matt.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Jammi. All right, continuing rounds, we've got Peter.
Oh, hi, I'm Peter Rudin-Burgess. I operate Parts Per Million. I specialize in doing solo supplements for other people's games. But I've released, Three Deep was my first solo game. That was 2016, I think. And then more recently, I've done a Wild West game, which was card-based. That's Devil's Staircase Wild West. A Navigator RPG is a space opera game that's got solo built into it. I'm living in the UK. Well, well, only just. I'm in Shetland, in the North Sea, sort of
Oh, wow.
250 miles north of Scotland. Yeah, that's why it's cold. That's what I'm saying. It's yeah. It's a small island with not many people, which is part of where the solo side of it comes in. I get to play far more often solo than I do actually with real people. Yeah, so mainly I'm a supplement writer these days.
Okay. I've actually been running your Mutant Years solo on the on my channel, so I'm kind of quite familiar with with your work. So yeah, thanks, Peter. Okay, continuing along clockwise, we've got John.
Okay, well, hi, my name is John. I don't really make games, but I run the Solo RPG Patreon, where I create weekly resources for solo gaming, yeah, which are mostly based off of my own solo campaigns or one-off games where I run, yeah, lots of stuff. But I also use input from my very creative patrons. Basically, it's like adventure seeds to use with your favorite Oracle system, interesting random generation tools or story mechanics to use in your game. Yeah.
Yeah, you're also quite involved in a lot of the big solo communities, right?
Yeah, well, I like to talk online, so yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. Mostly I'm in the Mythic GME Discord a lot, quite a lot, and on Twitter I like to, yeah, just like to talk about solo games and games in general. It's I've worked quite a few years in the card and board game industry and in the video game industry, so I'm used to talking about games, I suppose. So it's yeah, it's all I talk about, really.
Cool. Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Continuing clockwise, we've got Tana. Hi.
Hi, my name's Tana Pigeon. I published Mythic back in 2003, and it's been a wild ride ever since. I've also published the Crafter series, and the Adventure Crafter being the most popular of that. Let's see, right now I am working on Mythic Magazine, which is a new monthly magazine focusing on Mythic and the Crafter series and basically goodies to add to that. And I'm also finally getting around to doing a new edition of Mythic, which I originally meant to do on the 10th anniversary, which was 7 years ago. So I'm a little behind on it. But yeah, that's what I'm doing now.
Excellent. Thanks. And last but certainly not least, we've got Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm a game designer from Manchester in the UK. I run a website and kind of publishing arm called Loot the Room. I've been active for a few years, but it's only this year that I really got into writing solo games and things. I'm probably best known for my game The Wretched, which came out right at the beginning of kind of COVID life and times, and that's kind of spawned loads and loads and loads of games based on the engine of that, and that's kind of been what I've been focusing on this year. I'm working on a few more games with that system to come out beginning of next year, and a really big project that Jammi's involved in that I can't say any more about at this point, but it's going to be exciting.
Super exciting.
Super exciting.
Okay.
Yeah, solo games have kind of become my life this year, so I'm really excited to be here and talk about them.
Awesome. Cool. All right, so that's our intros done. I think the one. Okay, so the way this whole roundtable is going to be structured is I've fielded a bunch of questions from the community, originally just to see if there were any really interesting questions before I put my own questions together, and immediately I was swamped with tons and tons and tons of really good questions. So I'm basically going to be fielding questions and comments from the community across various different platforms that I've been gathering for the sort of past week. And that's how we're going to kind of go through this roundtable. Unfortunately, there are so many questions that I've had to curate them a little bit. So we're going to try and cover as many as we can. We've looked at them all together, and I've kind of prioritized which ones I think we should be looking at first. So if you've asked a question and we don't cover it, apologies, but there's a lot to talk about, and we're planning to talk for about 2 hours. So the first question that I want to kind of talk around before we get into the weeds was asked by a couple of people. It was asked by Yup Reading or Yup Reading over on Reddit and Jacques Turgot on MeWe. and that is solo gaming in the time of COVID. Is there a surge? And how might the genre change post-pandemic? Yeah. Anyone want to start talking about this this perceived surge in solo gaming?
Sure. I would say there's definitely a surge. It's interesting that I've been getting emails from people and messages. Some of them, in a way, saying solo playing is saving my sanity in quarantine life. And I don't know if these are necessarily people who are new to solo. I think most of them already familiar with it, but have found like a new appreciation for it when it's maybe their only outlet now to actually game. And so I've been getting messages like that, and it's actually kind of amazing if you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Because like, I know that thanks to things like Zoom and stuff, we can game online, but it's a lot harder for people to make the switch who aren't used to it. Like, right, it's just like personally, I've come to really love playing online with other people, but there really is like a paradigm shift to get into it, you know, versus solo RPGs where you can just jump in immediately. I've been getting a lot of emails too, people who are really new to TTRPGs who are looking for recommendations for solo games or two-player games, because sometimes it's them and one other person and they're trying to not, you know, kill each other during this time. So this helps. But I definitely, I think there's a really big surge too. And I think even in RPG creators, right? Because now we have a lot more time on our hands. And I think because of games like Wretched and what Chris did, it's really helped a lot of RPG creators just jump on. Like when Chris ran that jam, I think like a lot of first-time creators make games. Am I right, Chris?
Yeah, we got a lot of people who had never even played games before who suddenly got interested in it. We had like 96 entries to that jam, I think, and a ton of first-time creators and a lot of people who messaged me saying that, like Tana said, like whether it was the Wretched or another game that came out of that jam, that these solo games were their first experience of role-playing games, which was amazing. And I think games like you've had the popularity of games like 1,000-Year-Old Vampire that's kind of been enormous this year. And I think the question, is there a surge in solo games? And the answer is resoundingly yes.
I think another game to talk about. In fact, somebody else I had asked to come onto this panel, but he couldn't make it. Was Sean Tompkin with Ironsworn. And that's been an extremely massive game, and that was also, for me, I've played a couple of games of that, and that also has taken the industry by storm a little bit in terms of popularity, winning awards and all this kind of stuff. And that also, I think, helped show people that, that it's, you know, it's definitely a style of play that you might not necessarily think about. I guess that came out, technically it came out before COVID, didn't it?
I think that's a good definition. I don't really like to think about solo gaming as one genre. I mean, it's so diverse, and it's so made up of all kinds of different styles of play that it's kind of hard to define as a genre. If you take Mythic, for example, which really, I guess it really changed my life as far as role-playing goes. But that's been going strong since 2013, I guess it is. So
2003.
2003. Yeah. So there's a strong community there, and I think it's interesting to see that where before COVID it was kind of a really tightly knit small community where people also kind of used it like to test out a new role-playing game system or test out a new rule set, that it's now really become its own thing with really people adding ideas to it and just making a whole creative bunch of cool, awesome things that come out of it. And it's so diverse, it's hard to really put it to one genre. You have the oracles and the kind of mythic rule sets where you're basically trying to play a rule set that exists solo, and you have all these kinds of different ways like the Wretched, for example, where you take a gaming structure and you facilitate the emergence of story. Like emergent story, I feel is like the most defining thing you can think about when you're thinking of solo gaming as a genre. For me personally, I mean.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we got some questions coming up later to kind of talk about the difference there between, structured play, which, I mean, I think the way some people think about it is there are games that are designed specifically for solo play, like The Wretched, for example. And then you've got the tool sets, things like what Peter creates for, supplements for existing games, so you can play them solo. Mythic, of course, for playing any game solo. And yeah, it's just a huge amount of different, a huge variety, definitely. Okay, let's kind of look at the second part of that question then, which is how might, I mean, this is very speculative, and I just want to be be very conscious of the time, but how might the genre change post-pandemic? Anyone want to tackle that one?
Well, so 2 years ago, I was putting stuff out and it was selling in a few tens. I was pretty much doing it for myself, putting it out there. Now I'm having other publishers coming to me saying, "Oh, we've got a Kickstarter coming up. Will you write the solo rules for it?" I'm working on a project now for Wicked Ones. The game's not even available yet. It's a successful Kickstarter, but these things have been put into games. Well, as you even yourself, you're building solo in to games. And I think that it will become a standard part of the rule set, like it used to be in tabletop war games. Used to have solo rules in them out of the box. It was a standard thing, and that I think will become standard in role-playing games in the future. So yeah, I think it's completely normalized.
I think one thing sorry, go ahead.
No, when I look at my own playing habits, during COVID, I've done one thing, and that's take out all my old rule sets and all the stuff I bought when I was younger, and I've really never got to play it. And now it's the time to take all those old books out and just start playing. And I think just amazing that we're in a situation right now. If I look back from myself from the 90s and the 80s, looking forward, I wish I had that when I was younger.
Yeah, and I just quickly want to say in terms of like how I think the genre might change post-pandemic is, I think a lot of the really popular solo RPG games right now are those that help us find some form of catharsis. Like, I think that's why the Wretched was so popular, because it felt like we were on that ship with an alien. You know what I mean? I think post-pandemic, I think solo RPGs are going to help a lot of us like deal with the fallout of what's happening. Like, this is something that's lasted for a good year, and we're going to see the repercussions for several years after this. And I think solo RPGs have the potential to really help us go through that in a way, in a really safe space with just ourselves to reflect on it, I think.
Yeah. Cool. All right, let's move on. Although Chris, you wanted to say something as well. Do you want to?
I did. I can't remember what it was. I think one thing that's definitely happened is that because no one's been able to get together and play games together, the gaming press have started paying more attention to solo games as well. You've got like Shut Up and Sit Down and Tabletop Gaming Magazine listing solo games in their kind of top games of the year. And I think as a section of the industry, that's just going to, these games are just going to continue to grow. They're not as niche as they maybe once were anymore. I think that's going to see a lot more people dive into making them as well as playing them. And the more people you have making them, the more interesting things are going to happen with them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Cool. Right. The next kind of section of questions I wanted to talk about with all of you kind of follow a theme, which is people asking kind of solo play 101 sort of questions. And I know there's a lot of stuff out there where you can kind of look a lot of this stuff up. Communities you can go to and ask a lot of these questions, but to have it come straight from the creators, I think is also a bit special. So I wanted to try and address some of these at least. Again, I have 7 questions written down that I've pulled out of the community. I'm going to be focusing initially on 3 of them because I don't know how long it's going to take us to get through these. Some of them are quite meaty, so we'll just take them one at a time. The first one is from Adam B on Discord, and he's basically asked for tips for solo newbies, especially coming from a role-playing background. So if you're a seasoned role player, maybe a seasoned games master or something like that, and you're kind of coming to a solo RPG for the first time, or you're wanting to play solo for the first time, what are some tips that you could kind of offer to someone like that? Someone like me when I was starting out.
I would say the first game to solo play would be something you know really well, so you're not struggling with the rules and a new way of playing. If you're confident with your rules, so you're not constantly in and out of the books, that would actually help you get going faster, because the only new thing is the solo play side of it. That's probably the first thing I would. First piece of advice I would give.
Mm-hmm.
I would say also there's a psychological hurdle to this for a seasoned role player that Jammi alluded to earlier, and that this is a mental shift for you. I mean, you spend an entire hobby spending 2 hours making a character, spending 6 hours making an adventure, reading a 250-page rule book. And then for solo, you're asked to sit down with basically nothing and just go. And it's a very difficult thing for a seasoned player to get over. And I see this a lot online with people simply asking, how do I start? And it's almost like an artist sitting down on a blank canvas and having no idea what to do. And my advice for someone like that who's running into that, how do I just get it going, is the magic with the solo game is that once you kind of push that rock down the hill, it starts rolling on its own and takes on a life of its own. And so the best way to begin is just basically to begin. Just get that first scene going, get that first bit of action going, and then suddenly it all just starts happening. That's something you can really only discover by experiencing it. But a lot of the seasoned players kind of hit that roadblock right at the beginning. And I just say, just jump over that and trust the system, and it will take you places.
Yeah. That's good. That actually addresses the second question in this list as well from Paul Robin Discord. I don't want to kind of move on from this question, but he did. He basically said, how do you reduce the intimidation of solo roleplay? Because he wants to start, but he's terrified.
So
and
one thing
definitely
really,
is that.
Sorry,
yeah. Go on.
I keep talking over people.
No, all good, all good.
One thing that really helped me, because I started trying to get into journaling games. I think one of the first games I tried to play was Before the Tower Falls by Kiana Shaw. And I come from a really trad background, and I'm really used to having other players to bounce things off, and I really struggled with how kind of open and vague the prompts were. And it was only when I started playing Iron Swarm, which sort of models the games that I was used to playing and has some very firm prompts and moves, that I realized what the games were asking me to do. And from that, I became much more comfortable diving into a game like Before the Tower Falls that is like, here's a really vague prompt, just run with it. So I think my advice would be similar to Peter's, which is start with what you know and go from there.
I think it's easier to start solo playing if you are a game master or a DM, just because you're more used to having to improvise. If the party go left when you plan something on the right, you have to start freewheeling and making stuff up. And if you're used to just making stuff up, just having a small prompt or a couple of words to use, that becomes more natural. For players, they're used to being fed a complete scene and then being asked, what do you do now? And only having to worry about themselves. Whereas the game master's worrying about everything. So it's probably easier if you're familiar with running a game, if you're going to get into it. But if you're not, then do what Tana said and just go with it.
Yeah, I also think if you look at the community of players, when you have experienced solo players discussing how they like to play solo, it's like mostly a lot of tables and a lot of methods of generation and complicated oracles, and they all, if you're new to solo role playing, I guess that's all kind of intimidating. And I think limiting yourself, yeah, that's probably more interesting often. Like a simple structure and like a simple story to develop, and then like Tana said, the stone keeps rolling down the mountain, and it collects more story like that. It's all, yeah. I also agree with Peter that it's not really a big leap from game mastering. In fact, one of the things you do when you're a game master, you're laying down the structure for the story to develop, and you're doing exactly the same thing whether you're playing in a group or playing solo. You're creating structure for yourself for the story to emerge. So it's not, it's basically the same thing, but you're doing it all yourself.
Yeah, and I think another way to like be able to jump in, I can highly recommend on Twitter. It's at Lark Brigade. So Robert, I think it hasn't been super updated recently, but Robert has a whole slew of like solo and duo games on itch.io, and a lot of them are like pay what you want or absolutely free. I think, if you just want to try one, and if it doesn't really zing with you, you can just jump to the next one over and over again until you find something that really sings for you. But also, you're by yourself. If you mess up, it's okay to come back the next day and try again. No one's gonna know.
Yeah, I think that's for me the strangest thing, because I definitely felt that terror when before I ever actually played a solo game. I'd been watching, like, lurking in the periphery from the Google Plus days. There was this like lone wolf role-playing Google Plus group that I was in, and I remember reading, like, kind of watching people talking about it, and like, ooh, when am I gonna start? And I never did. It was just, I don't know, it was very, very odd. I'd done some choose your own adventure type of stuff, but it's not really the same thing, because that's also kind of holding your hand through the whole process. So yeah.
But didn't you do your very first solo session on YouTube?
No, that was my first. I guess that was my first. Yeah, actually, that probably was my very first proper solo game where I wasn't doing a choose your own adventure. I had done some co-op GM-less stuff with Ironsworn previously, so that was kind of, that opened my eyes to the possibilities, because when I did a one-on-one, a duet game, no GM, with Ironsworn, and that was incredible. It's almost like playing solo, right? Because you're kind of making it up, and you got another person there to kind of help you. And that, in fact, is a really great way to get into soloing, I would suggest, because the intimidation factor is a little bit less, because you've got somebody else there that's also kind of bouncing ideas off of you. There's no GM. You're all coming up with stuff yourself. And if you hit like a wall, that other person there is going to help kind of keep the story progressing. You can kind of bounce ideas off of each other. In fact, my first proper solo one is also cheating a bit, because I was live streaming my first session, and I had like 3 or 4 people watching, so I like hit a little mental roadblock, like, well, what does that mean? I would turn to the audience and say, what do you think?
That's cheating.
It is definitely cheating, but yeah, anyway, moving swiftly on.
But that's a good advice. Go on stream and have people hang out with you. I think that's cool.
Or play with another person if you can. Like, Jammi, I know you mentioned playing with 2 people, and doing a duet game where it's a 2-person game without a GM. I know you have quite a few games like that. Is another nice way to ease into it, because you have a lot of the similar structure to a solo game, in that there's no GM, that's emergent narrative, and yet you don't have that intimidation of kind of having to come up with all this stuff on your own. So I think that could also be a really nice entry point.
Yeah, also great to play with kids during the Corona period. I love playing with my son. I would just take an adventure, and we go on an adventure together, and it's like it's like the holodeck in Star Trek, but with your kids. So it's great. But awesome. I had one question, which is always it kind of bothered me, but I've always been curious about it. If you, I personally don't create solo games, but if you look at creating a solo game, if I look at the video game of my experience in video games, I would really like to ask solo game creators what they think is the output that the player experiences. Is it do you create a game and what do you expect the experience of the player to be? Because in journaling games, like Chris mentioned, it's very definite in that you're writing down your gaming experience. But a lot of solo games, they create the solo experience and it's definitely there, but it's not like you're being funneled into this is the experience that I'm expecting you to have. It's like, are you playing this game and you're voicing the voices by yourself in a room where nobody hears you, or are you writing stuff down? It's how are you experiencing? I really wonder, and I look forward to when the solo boom develops more, that game creators will funnel the experience more and give a definite, like a kind of guide or outline or like an output expectation of what their game experience is like. And many of the games now, they really they leave it hanging quite a bit and leave it up to you, which is fine, but that's also what's intimidating, I think, to get back to the question about what is solo play.
Yeah,
I think all my solo play ends up being a journaling game, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I think journaling games are really good for novice solo players, because they really hold your hand and give you an expectation of, they give you what is expected of you, kind of an expectation to fulfill.
Yeah, they're often a lot less dense as well in terms of they tend to be, like, if you look at the itch scene, for example, you find a lot of them that are 12 pages long, like A5, which I guess is what, half letter to the US, and very easy to read. You're jumping straight in doing something, and that's, I think, I've been looking at quite a lot of those recently and thinking, like, I don't know why I didn't pick any of these up earlier, because that would have also been a really easy way to get into it, because they do have it quite, usually they're very well defined, as you were saying, with what the output is meant to be. So,
because like when I work on my own, if it's a lyric game, which is a more like poetic, like version of a solo RPG in my mind. Well, a lot of people argue, a lot of people make lyric games that are not solo experiences. I like making lyric games that are solo experiences. I think my years as a trainer and a teacher, though, like I feel compelled to try to guide the person every step of the way, just so that, just to help with the intimidation factor. But I do think that people who are neurodivergent prefer not having so many like rules or so many things to follow. Like, I think they prefer the more open prompts. So from what I've heard from people that I've talked to. So I think it really just depends on what you're most comfortable with. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I agree.
WeForest 3 is, I think WeForest 3 is really an example of a game that's still it's like an interpretive experience, but it's still guiding in the sense that you're guided towards towards having an expectation of what this game asks you to do. So that's I don't mean it literally that like you have to have rules to be able to fulfill, but it's good to be guided in the experience instead of leaving it up to someone who doesn't have any experience solo playing to kind of define for themselves what solo playing should be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm dyslexic, and I hate writing, and any record of my solo play is incredibly terse. It's just no more than bullet points. I just don't like writing, so I don't produce much output at all. But in my supplements, I do showcase a few. Some people do this, some people do that. Find your own way. So I do leave people hanging. I am guilty of that for sure.
Well, I didn't mean it's like a guilty sentence, but it's when you're thinking about people new to a game, it's always good, I think, to give people like a guided expectation of what the experience is like or can be like.
I like to throw out something else in regards to intimidation and new players. One thing that I find that still helps me is if you start the game with something that inspires you, something that excites you, that excitement can override the intimidation. Like, for instance, I love tables of like magic random effects or random mutations. And I might simply run across like a table that's so awesome that the only thing I want from the solo game is just to use that table. And I'm excited about it, right? Everything else will just happen and develop, but that excitement gets me over the intimidation. I mean, it's kind of stuff like what John makes that puts out every week. And if you have maybe you just want to go into this interesting tavern or a section of wrecked freeway in an apocalypse game or something like that, that excitement can override that intimidation, and suddenly you find yourself in a game you never would have envisioned before.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. All right. The next question is very much related to this. And it's actually like a fairly meaty question. 3 people were asking more or less variations on the same question. That's Judd G from MeWe, Attila in Discord, and Big T-Bomb on Reddit. And it basically all around, what are the best types of, are there specific rule systems that are better or worse suited for solo role-playing? Does it matter? What are some tips for running, for example, quite crunchy games, like crunchy traditional games solo? If you're relatively new to tabletop role-playing, crunchy just means generally, there's a lot of discussion what the word crunchy means, but I think everyone would probably agree that a very simple way of describing it would be complex. A game with a high level of complexity, whatever that happens to mean. So over to you. I've got my own opinions on this, but let's hear from all of you. What are your thoughts on games that are particularly well suited to it? In fact, let's start with Peter. I was going to say
play anything.
Yeah, because I've seen
I think you can solo play anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I support something like 47 different games or systems. Some of them kind of are vague. Kind of the OSR stuff that covers all of the variants of sort of. But I think anything can be solo played. If you have a copy of Mythic and a rule book, you can solo play it. If you can have something which is more tailored to it, which is what I do, and but anything can be solo played. If you're going to play something crunchier, and I come from a role master background, which is kind of the masters of crunch. You've got to know the game inside out, otherwise. The amount of time you will, unless you actually really enjoy it, if you really enjoy diving into those books and finding exactly the right rule and all the modifiers and every feat and special effects and all, and documenting all of that, if you love that, then great, just go for it. If you don't, the amount of time you spend doing that, because a lot of solo play happens in your short-term memory. You're imagining this scene, you're improvising it, you're imagining the action, and if you then have to almost park that and then go and find the rule, I certainly find that I will lose the impetus of the story, the evolving story. So if you're going to play something crunchy, either have 16 million pages of notes arrayed in front of you with every single possible note ruling that you're going to need, or know those rules to the level you are comfortable with, and just go with that. But also the whole OSR thing of rulings, not rules. If you can't find the right rule, just decide what happens and then move on. Don't get het up on trying to find something in companion 7 page 92. Just rule on it, and then you can always look it up afterwards. But yeah, anything can be solo played.
Yeah, I have to agree. Like, there's so many times people have reached out to me, and a game that I really made with several people in mind, people are like, oh yeah, I made up my own rules and I had a lot of fun making this a solo play experience. So I have to agree with Peter, like anything can be a solo game.
Yeah, I like to agree with that as well. And that's another thing that, get back to what we said earlier about changing your headspace when it comes to games. Anything can be solo played. And people forget also, if you have an oracle sitting right there, it can do more than just answer a yes or no question about does the orc attack or whatever. For instance, what I like to do sometimes is take a game that maybe I've never played, and the only section of the book I'll learn is the character creation section. I'll make a character. Then I'll just start playing. And if I don't know a rule in the book, I'll just let the oracle decide it. If I don't know like the poison or toxin rules, I'll just say, does the person succumb to the poison, and just let the oracle do it. So as I progress through the adventure, I might learn more details of the game, but instead of flipping through the book, if I don't know it, I'll just let the oracle. And this is another way where solo play forces us to experience these games differently than when we learned how to do it in the first place. And that's okay. That's a big thing. It's okay to do that.
Yeah, that was exactly my experience with Ironsworn, because I don't learn rules by reading them. I've really struggled to learn the rules by reading a rule book. I have to be playing to do it. So I basically just jumped into Ironsworn with the very basics of the rules, and if anything I was unsure about and I couldn't find it in the rule book, I just used the oracles, and I just slowly, over the course of playing it and over like a week or so, just slowly got to learn the rules. And I think solo games give you a lot more freedom to get the rules wrong, because like people said before, you don't have a table full of other players watching you get the rules wrong. You can just kind of learn at your own pace and in your own preferred method of learning, which was really useful for me.
Yeah, nobody's screaming at you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, and also I think there's when you look at what is solo play or what is fun in solo playing, it's a lot more than the actual playing activity. At least for me and for a lot of people also in the community. I think it's thinking about your character ideas. It's thinking about what kind of tables you're going to use. It's generating stuff in advance. It's all this stuff that really in normal play, I think mostly happens in the head of the game master, and now it's all in your own headspace, and you're always you have such freedom that you're thinking of everything in your world and what's going to happen, and all these interesting tables and stuff to use, that it's more than just the rolling of the dice and the playing of the moment. It's way more than that, where the fun is at, I mean, for me.
Yeah, cool. We had some questions here, which I was going to come back to later, but I kind of want to jump into them a little bit. There are quite a few questions that we're almost asking very specific things in terms of like, how do you use oracles? When do you use oracles instead of skills? And questions along those lines. And I think we've kind of talked about that a little bit in terms of saying it's your game. There's no right or wrong answer, right? But one thing I do want to delve into, because people are talking about it in the chat right now as well on the channel, and that's about oracles and the use of oracles versus, especially if you're running something like BRP. Let's use BRP as an example, a game that has a lot of skills, right? There can be a temptation to use the skill, like use skill checks a lot, and to frame your narrative in terms of skill checks, right? So one of the questions was about just some general guidance on, I kind of assuming it's, this is from one of my Discord servers I'm very active in. I know this person plays some BRP D100 based games. So like when do you, like, what's the guidance around using oracles versus using skill checks if you're playing a kind of a traditional game like that? And let's start a little bit of a discussion around oracles.
I like to use both at the same time. I would make the skill check. Let's say if it was like a tracking type role or an observation type role, I would make the skill check, and if I was successful, then I would use the oracle to find out whether there was something to see or whether there were tracks to follow, rather than deciding whether the tracks exist first and then seeing if I find them. So I like to use them one after the other.
Anyone else?
I think that's such a good answer. There's nothing more to say.
Excellent.
We're done.
Yeah. Okay. Another question kind of related. That was from Adam B on Discord. He had another one, which is kind of all relating to this, which was talking about playing out scenes. So, like, when to play out a scene versus just doing a single dice roll versus just hand waving and keeping things in the kind of the narrative space. How do people kind of, what are some tips and guidelines or advice around that sort of thing?
I think the answer is go to what you're interested in, isn't it? If you're going to do a scene and it's not particularly gripping to you, then hand wave it away or roll for it. And if you get to something that you think, yeah, this is really exciting and I want to dig into it, then dig into it, because it's your game and it's your story, and you're the boss ultimately. So no one's going to force you to do a scene you don't want to do.
And unless you're me, nobody's watching you either.
Yeah, and I think Peter brought up a good point earlier when he said it's easier if you're a GM, right? Like, you sort of know as a GM when you're going to go into a scene and when you're going to just hand wave something. But yeah, I think the core of it is just go with your instinct, just go with your gut. Like, the moment it feels unfun, or, you know, like Chris said, just skip to the next part. That's the most fun part of solo games, for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. But on the other hand, if you look at the player's perspective, especially a new player, I can definitely see where you're when the thought enters your mind that should I hand wave this maybe not so exciting part, that it feels like cheating. And if you're new to solo playing, I think that's something that really is hard to put away. In a normal game, the game master gives you permission to skip the not so exciting parts, and in a solo game, you're the one who's educating who's deciding for, this is the part that I really want to explore. This is the part that is going to just be a roll and that's it. So you have to give yourself permission, I think, and that's something you learn over time when you're playing solo.
I think that comes back to just confidence, right? And if you're new to solo, as we've already discussed, like, what your entry point is, and the advice that you've all given of either stick with a game that you're already very familiar with, you're going to find it much easier to ease into it and to kind of understand how to do those different things. Or if you're getting into something that's much more lightweight and like a journaling type of game, again, you're going to be easing into something very, like, you're going to just, I think, build up the experience, and then you'll get more confidence. Because I think, like you were saying, John, where you look at I've got a big shelf full of games I've never played, and I've also not done a lot of solo role play. And the idea of me opening one of those books, and I mean, first learning the rules, I guess, is a big barrier. But just thinking about, like, I could play any of those games solo, but I haven't, and that's mainly because I know that they've been written for a traditional group structure. And the idea of, how to interpret how the game has been designed, and maybe I'm overthinking, I probably am definitely overthinking this, but, like, this is something subconscious, I know, which happens, I think, with a lot of people. And it's definitely coming through, I think, through some of these questions is, how do I take something that's not been designed for solo play and try and do something solo with it? And, and that's this whole thing with scenes and, when do you roll the skill and when you hand wave it, but.
Well, that's one thing for me personally when I play, and when you have a rule set that's not really cut out for me. Example, I like to play one character and then maybe a few others, but definitely not a whole party, even in OSR games, because I like the kind of intimate connection with a solo character that evolves during play. But if you think the rule set is kind of intimidating towards what you're trying to do solo, it's definitely always helpful, for me at least, to lean more on the Oracle side of your playing experience than on the rule side. If you come to a point where the rule set is kind of iffy for what you're trying to do solo, you can definitely just put more confidence or pressure on the Oracle side of what you're trying to do than on the rule set. But depending on the situation that you're in, that definitely works for me.
Yeah. Cool. All right, let's move across to the next kind of part of the roundtable, which is more about designing for solo play. And I've just seen Chris has written in the chat. I'm assuming you're Loot the Room, like
I am,
YouTube,
yeah.
Talking about safety tools in solo play, and it's a very interesting. I think it's a very, very interesting kind of conversation to have, because I think a lot of people don't even think about that. Don't even spare it a second thought. Like, well, I'm playing with myself. Why should I worry about safety tools? I've read it in the Wretched, so I'd like to kind of pass it over to you and to just kind of ask about safety tools. Why are they needed in the solo game?
Yeah, when I wrote the Wretched, a big part of the game is that the rules in the text lie to you, because you get told straight up front that you can win this game and you can't. And I didn't really consider whether safety tools were needed at all, because I effectively come from a position of privilege. And it was only when Jammi was writing their Wretched game, and they wrote a really insightful thread about the need for safety tools, especially with a mechanic like that where the game itself is lying to you. And I think actually Jammi might be better equipped to answer this question than I am, now that I'm just started talking. So I'm just going to pass it over to Jammi, actually, because
we can pass it back and forth, no problem. But yeah, I think so the Wretched game, I really loved it so much, but I remember when I got to that last part where the game was confronting me about how I had allowed myself to believe in hope. It really, as a marginalized person, you are often told that if you just go along with the system, if you just follow the rules, that things will work out. But it's not true, right? Like, the world is not built for a marginalized person. And I experience it on a daily level, but even on a regular level, I can see that, I can work on something, I can do the same amount of effort as someone else, but I'm not going to get the same result as someone else, right? So it felt, I realized, like, I really want to create a game where people know from the start that this is not going to go well, because in a way that's cathartic. Like, a lot of the games I love to play are like Bluebeard's Bride or Trophy Dark, or I love games where you get to play to lose, because for me it's very cathartic to put that out there in a space where I know I'm playing to lose, right? Versus where in real life, where sometimes I'm tricked into thinking I have a chance at these things. So but what I really appreciated in talking about it on Twitter, on the thread, was Chris was very open about it, and it was very easy to shift into the conversation of safety. And from there, other people were talking to me about it, like how during their solo play experience, sometimes you don't realize, like, you think you're okay, right? You think like, oh, okay, I'm just going to make this thing up and blah, blah, blah. Like, we don't realize what's coming from our subconscious, right? Sometimes there are things that are locked away by trauma or something that's just uncomfortable, and we don't even realize how we're bothered by it until we're like in the moment and confronting it, right? So I think it's really important to have those safety tools in place, just to give yourself, I mean, essentially what you're doing is giving yourself permission to, like, if you're not comfortable, if you're not having fun, allow yourself to change the state of the game in a way that we don't always get to do in real life, basically. So but yeah, so Chris, like, in your experience, like, how did it feel, like, implementing safety tools after that, and how did it inform future, like, games that you were working on?
yeah, it's something I've been really conscious of ever since that conversation. And I know Matt Sanders, who wrote the Wretched and Alone SRD, was really had the same kind of response to me, which was like, shit, we didn't think about this because it's not something that affects us. And we realized at that point, and I've realized going forward, that writing the Wretched was, for me, a very cathartic experience, because it's basically my reaction to everything that was going on in my life at the time. But when you write a game, you put it into the world for other people to engage with, and the second you put it into the world, it's not a short story that I've written and put in a book and no one's ever going to see. I have a responsibility as a creator to A, to take care of the people playing my games, and B, give them the tools to take care of themselves. And that's something that I'm really trying to, as a creator, keep very like forefront in my mind when I write games from now on, especially as I seem to be swinging hard into horror games recently. So especially in horror, it's really, really important because, you know, if you're watching a film and it's got content in it that you don't like, you'll turn the film off and you won't think twice about it. But when you're at a game table with other people or even on your own, sometimes you feel so invested that you feel like you can't walk away. And I think it's hugely important to give players explicit permission to say, actually, I'm done with this now and I'm going to go and do something else that's healthier for me.
Yeah,
I don't know
absolutely.
if that made any sense.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I think that made a lot of sense. And like I realize like in a lot of games, because safety tools are really important. But I also think like building safety into the game is just as important. So like in Bluebeard's Bride, for example, I'm just going to bring one example because there are several ways it builds in safety. There's an interesting move that only applies to the player and not the character, and it's called Shiver from Fear. And so you tell the GM what you are afraid will happen, and the GM will tell you how it is worse than you fear. And then you get to pass on the responsibility for handling that scene to the next player. And I really like it because it forces, well, I don't want to say forces, it encourages the player to just spell out exactly what they're afraid of. And so you as a GM know, okay, I'm going to switch over and make sure we don't get into that, but I'm going to go into delicious territory on the other side because like worse than they thought of. And after I played that, I thought about how can I apply that to solo games, right? Where I can give people, you know, structure and guidance, but I can also like give them like built-in ways to like shift the narrative as they like on their own terms. I think would be pretty cool. So it's something I've been considering lately.
So in a way, kind of addressing those things up front.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it can't be a secondary thing because I'm not going to mention the game per se, but there was a game I bought recently that I felt like safety wasn't really a concern and a lot of other things. And when I approached the creator about it, their reasoning was, oh, well, it's just me and someone else working in the game. We can't afford to hire a consultant or, you know, and they sold a lot of copies on Drive-Thru RPG. I'm just gonna put it that way. And I was like, because they hit one of those like metal things, right? And I was like, I think you can afford to at least check in with someone. But after that, I was like, I'm never gonna buy from this person again because I know they don't care if someone's not having a fun time. Like the worst thing that I can hear is if someone playing my game felt like I didn't care about them, because I really care about every single person who plays my game or gives the time to check out one of my games. I want them to feel like, you know, I care that they're having fun. That's the most important thing, right?
Yeah. Cool. That was a good question that you threw in there, Chris.
That was the chat brought that
up. That's true. Yeah, I've just been kind of quickly skimming through the chat. Thanks, by the way. The chat is very active. There's a lot of good discussion going on in there.
Hi, chat.
Another question then from Rodrigo, who's one of the players on the channel here. He talks about the importance of structure and using a solo engine versus improv with oracles. And this question could have kind of gone in the kind of solo play 101, but I kind of wanted to throw it in here as a kind of a question to you as creators, and say, how do you when you're coming up with things like whatever you're creating, how do you think about that in terms of building an engine into the game or kind of leaning a bit more heavily onto oracles?
Yeah, I think Chris, I'm gonna like pull you in because I really want to know because I thought it was when I first read The Wretched and I saw The Wretched and Alone system, I thought it was so smart. Like, what made you like push towards like a Jenga tower and all of these ideas? Like, what brought that about? I think.
So The Wretched I wrote not long after I'd started to get into solo games and journaling games. And like I said earlier, I'd tried to dive into journaling games, and I'd found that I really needed some structure in terms of how the game is meant to progress. And I'd been playing a lot of Dread, and I was writing a horror game, and I really liked how I've always liked how well the Jenga tower as a mechanism creates rising tension in a way that I haven't seen many dice systems do. And then when I'd been playing a lot of Dread, and I've been playing a lot of The Quiet Year, kind of back and forth, and when I put that Oracle system on top of a Jenga tower, it just, for me, it just clicked and seemed to work in a way that I almost feel.
Feed the cats.
Notice everyone, Alexa's telling me to feed my cats.
You should do that. Yeah, I almost wrote Wretched to be deliberately a very guided experience because I personally had struggled to get into journaling games and felt like I needed more guidance, and I almost wanted it to be like baby's first journaling game and like a foot in the door and a way to, like, a gateway drug to journaling games for people, basically. And hopefully it had that effect.
Yeah. I want to go over to Tana and ask about solo engines, because you've got probably the best-selling solo engine that exists. Yeah, and it's also full of oracles. So, kind of, what was like? How did that come about? And you kind of mentioned that you've been working on. I know it's called Mythic Deluxe, and I've kind of seen some of your posts about it in various places. But why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of why you went with an engine and like something a little bit more structured when it comes to kind of like scenes and how Mythic is structured. And how how the oracles kind of all played into that.
Sure. When you think about it, people are approaching their solo games and trying to figure out the structure. But in a way, it's really no different than when you're playing a traditional role-playing game. You've got a game master sitting behind the screen deciding what happens. Some of it is taken from the adventure, so that's highly structured, and some of it is made up on the spot. It's no different from with a solo game. It's just in a slightly different format. And like Jammi said and some others, you're pretty much following your gut and following what's interesting. You get a result from an oracle answering a question. You take that information and you pretty much write it for as long as you can, whatever element it added to the adventure. And when you reach the next questionable point, of course, you go back to the oracle. And that really is no different from a traditional game. As far as scene structures and stuff like that, that at least gives you the skeleton of a structure so that you're not completely thrown into the wild. So within that scene, you play it out until your interest is tapped out, and then basically the next scene is the next point of interest. And basically everyone here has said that exact same thing in one shape, form, or another. And that's kind of the psychological hurdle, again, of going from traditional gaming to a solo game. It's different, but it's also the same in a way.
And I think what's brilliant about Mythic, for me at least, when I first encountered it, it gives you a game loop. And so it gives you input, it processes what your action, and then it renders the new game state in the scene. So you set up a scene, you play out the scene, and then you based from that you go to the new scene. So it gives you a kind of loop to experience your solo game through. And that's really, for me at least, that's really what broke my that's really what opened my mind up to how to just start playing solo. It's it's all fun, all fine to think about solo game, like, oh, we're going to tell a story and we're going to play through a game, but what is the actual act of going through the motions? And that's where Mythic really, I think, broke the mold in the sense that you have, here's a scene, you play through the scene, then you make a new scene, and here are all these different tools and oracles and checks to use while you're doing so, to give you kind of a handholding through the whole experience.
Yeah.
What I normally try and do is try and make, the set of tools I'm building as seamless as they possibly can be to the game they're meant to be used with. So rather than going, it's something completely generic that can be used with anything, it's almost like trying to not break the suspension of disbelief. It's kind of trying to keep people in the game more whilst they're using rules which are outside the game. So obviously they're all written by me, and I play the game solo, and as I'm playing it, I'm refining what I'm doing. So all of my little booklets are not that different from each other, because it all comes from one imagination, but each one is a tailored set of tools to the individual game. And if you looked at them all over the last few years, you'll see a little evolution as I've improved as a solo player. So the rules or the tools I've provided evolve as I go, but they all it is designed as one tool for that game. So it's very much an engine, a coherent engine, rather than just picking individual individual random tables and things. But funny enough, I used the phrase that Chris used of, I see my little booklets as a gateway drug to solo play, exactly the same as the Wretched is the gateway drug for journaling. My little books are little. They are almost limited by design, and almost every solo player will have favorite tools and favorite sources and favorite ways of imagining answers, and I expect them all to evolve from the little seed I've given them. But yeah, I think for a starting thing, then a coherent engine is the way I wanted it to be, so that's what I build.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting question. I think if you're talking about your not your game specifically, but solo games as an engine, you as creators, I would be interested to have you talk a little bit more about how do you define your game as an engine or as a game loop? Of how does the loop process work for you when you're creating a game? I know for me, in the case of Mythic, for example, it's all really structured around a loop, like it's a cyclical experience going forward, which I think is awesome for solo playing. But it would be interested to hear you talk about what's your view on creating loops or creating loop game experiences for players to go through. Peter.
The structure for me comes from, I still use that scene structure. I still think in scenes. But for me, a scene ends whenever I would skip a moment of time. Now, it could be a 3-month sea journey. It could be literally running from the attic to down the stairs. If I just appear downstairs, then that is, a director is called cut when I left the attic, and they said action when I arrived downstairs. And it's that, as soon as I break the scene, break the action, I think I have changed scene. So I talk in scenes. If I'm, lots of my games, not games, the little game books, they will do a set of roles, and at the start of a scene, you will find some prompts which will, which will suggest that you weave into the scene, or I did a little supplement for Mothership RPG, and I don't know if we touched on it earlier about controlling many player characters. No, I don't like it. I like to have one character that is basically me. But the crew in Mothership is vitally important. Half of the problems that you're going to try and overcome come from your crew, and so I had to adapt some rules for controlling other other people in the world, and rather than having you rolling constantly, what's this one doing, what's that one doing, I set that up before you start playing the scene. You set it up, you do some rolls, you keep those rolls, and then you play the scene. And at the end of the scene, you reset, you do another set of rolls. So I still think in scenes, the scene structure is, for me, because I only write from my own experience, that is the way that I play, the way that I present it. So it's still a cyclic thing of set up a scene, play a scene, finish a scene, set up a next scene.
There's a lot of discussion in the chat as well, which is quite interesting, talking about keeping the momentum going and making sure that the momentum doesn't stop. And I think that kind of ties into it quite a bit as well, I would suggest. Yeah.
There's something I'd like to throw in here that I don't think a lot of new solo players think about. You have the Oracle, and you use it to determine questions in your adventure. But sometimes the players don't realize that you can pull the camera back and use that Oracle for bigger picture questions. Like, it's not just do I find treasure in the room, or that kind of thing. It can be a whole global thing, like does my character advance or have like experience over the next 2 years or something like that. It's just like, if you run into a momentum roadblock, and this usually comes when you feel like you've tapped out a current scene and you have no ideas for the next scene. You're like, so what do I do now? You feel like that momentum has suddenly stopped. At this point, you can throw a total curveball into the Oracle, like just throw something really random in there. Like, sometimes I'll just pick a random page in the role-playing book I'm playing. Let's say I open up to a page about sea travel or something. Bam. The next scene is about sea travel. And suddenly we have a whole new direction we're going. So it doesn't have to be just specifically what is happening right here, like right now. When you kind of pan back a little bit, you can help break those momentum blocks and get you going in a whole new direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I really like what Peter's doing at the moment with I forgot the name, but I call it. Cut up. I like to use. It's similar, but I like to use blackout poetry engines to like. It's the same thing. You cut up a book, and then it all comes. In the case of the blackout poetry, it all comes together in a slightly making sense structure, and then you have an idea that's outside of what you're thinking of at the moment, but that can really help you come up with new ideas and new story directions.
Yes, that involves a lot less trying to interpret what word prompts mean, or getting two prompts which don't seem to fit. I find that can cause that one of those roadblock moments when you get a prompt and you don't know what it means. I've had people say to me that that's a problem, but the cut up method is you are literally just stringing words together. I've seen blackout poetry done the same way, where you're trying to read it as if you're that's what the GM said to you, what the GM described. So it's really, really interesting. I find it very, very slow, and I do like my games to play fast. So I'm finding it hard work, but I am getting faster.
This
But
is
yeah,
one of-
it's definitely something that. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was gonna say this is one of those things where I remember reading about. I think when you kind of blog posted about Dracula, which I think is maybe your most recent one, possibly.
It's the most recent one that's out there.
Yeah.
There's another one coming Monday, but yeah, go on, Dracula.
And thinking exactly the same. Like, that's a really interesting idea, but it seems really slow in practice. And it strikes me as that's kind of a really interesting idea for some sort of web app or even a phone app to kind of to take a piece of fiction that is in the public domain and have something random like that to kind of pull passages or phrases or snippets from the book out and stick them together, so you don't have to.
Those tools do exist.
Okay.
There's several concordance tools which you can use. Someone's sharing on the Lone Wolf Discord. Someone's sharing a brilliant piece of software that does that.
Okay, interesting.
It doesn't matter if things are slow if you really enjoy doing it. So if you're spending ages doing, arranging cut-ups and you're thinking, oh, for God's sake, why isn't... I just want to move on. I want to kill the vampire. Then the cut-ups are not the right tool for you. But if you're arranging the cut-ups and you think it's brilliant and you're loving it and you'd have never come up with this yourself, then that is just as valid way of spending your time as rolling to hit and rolling damage.
Yeah, definitely. For example, the behavior check in Mythic, if you do it by hand, it can take quite a while. But I really enjoy setting up conversations and dialogues and making like little tab sheets for all the characters involved with their different states. So that's really I think an example of that's also a part of solo playing, that taking a step back and enjoying something that's part of the process instead of the actual playing.
Yeah,
it's almost like we're all nerds, really, isn't it?
No, we're definitely all nerds.
Almost as if.
Okay, I've got another question here, which I think is quite interesting, from Judd G on MeWe. And he said, or the question he's asking is, when choosing or making an oracle, what are some important / hidden / classic do's and don'ts?
Beware of making it overly complicated. The oracle is an interesting thing where it has to answer the most complex questions about an open virtual world, your game, and generate any conceivable content, while at the same time being simple enough to be nimble and fast and use it whether you're playing solo or you're running a game with 10 people and using it as your GM. That is easier said than done. And a lot of times what seems simple in play turns out to be quite complicated. And sometimes you've got to, this is hard. I remember, I can't remember, I think John Gardner, but there was a writer who once said, sometimes you have to murder your darlings. And by that he meant you're writing a piece of fiction, there's a passage you love, but it doesn't fit into the story. So you have to cut it out. And sometimes if you're designing an oracle and you've got a piece of it that maybe you love it, but it might be hamstringing the overall play experience too much. I've had to do this with Mythic and some other things. There's stuff that's laying on the cutting room floor that I loved. But at the end of the day, you can't just throw everything in there. It as an engine, it has to run smoothly, and sometimes even the most brilliant bits will slow it down just a little too much, and you have to be honest with yourself about those things, and sometimes cut those out.
Well, put all your cutting floor tidbits in an envelope and send them to me.
I'm just going to put them in Mythic magazine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so when I write my games, so I don't use like an oracle in the traditional sense. I think it's more like what you see in Wretched, where there's like guidance. Like when I wrote Reforce 3, I had such a hard time with the that game was one of the hardest I worked on. I think it was like 2 3 weeks, like several hours a day. And so like I had to guide the player through and really make it a very structured experience, but still allow for however they wanted to interpret it.
Yeah.
So there were so many times when I was typing through, I was like, oh, but then what if this happens? And then if that happens, and then it won't really quite make sense. And this is me cheating a little, like leaning on my GM side. Like one of the things I'm known for as a GM is I'm really quotation mark excellent at creating mystery or quotation mark connecting all the dots. But all I really do as a GM is like, I just make a few like, well, as far as you can tell, it appears to be the case, or like if someone brings up something, I'll just go along with it. And so players feel very smart for figuring it out. But the truth is I had no idea what is happening as a GM and I was just making it up as I went along. Like very often, like one time, just to give an example as a GM, someone was like, I'm going to call them, right? And see what's up with that. I was like, oh yeah, gosh, cell phones, they like solve so many issues, right? So when they called the NPC, I had the NPC respond with, you're exactly where I need you to be. It's all going according to plan. And the player was like, oh, how did they know? And I'm like thinking, I don't know. I just think it's a cool thing for them to say in the moment. We'll figure it out later. So I try to do that as an oracle where I'm just giving just enough for people. And then I don't have to worry about like how everything is going to fit exactly together. But I do take a lot what I learned from PBTA, which is to ask really evocative, interesting questions. I really try to put together like two very different feelings in the same section, just to see where they can play with that tension. Like for example, one of the oracle things or things that can happen in my in the light of death, the demon cries. If you pull the King of Cups, I told a beautiful lie to help someone find their inner strength. How did they become stronger than you? Right. So I wanted to interplay the idea of like you're helping someone, but also at the same time, you've now become lesser somehow. So when I write those things, I like to include those tension points just so that it gives the player more to explore with. It like inspires them more, like where are they going to go from there. But yeah, that's because my games tend to have a more specific, like step-by-step kind of structure with the solo stuff.
Chris, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've never really written, none of my games use a traditional oracle. I think purely because, like Jammi said, they're all guided towards a very, very specific experience and they're all very tightly focused. So I've kind of cheated in that respect, in that I don't have to worry about what the rest of the world is doing as much. But one of the things that I try to do with my prompts is alternate between the specific and the vague, or not the vague, but I alternate between very, very specific questions that drive towards the point of the game, and then slightly more open questions that are more about letting the player flesh out the world themselves. But yeah, I don't worry about the wider world of the game because I'm a lazy writer and I write very focused games to get around that.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good definition of both the Wretched and Reforce 3 also has kind of that combination between a guided experience and an interpretive freedom. It's a really interesting space, I think, because it really it gives the player a sense of what is expected of them, and also the freedom to go wherever they need to go to fulfill that expectation.
Oh yeah, and I want to include one thing as a fun cheat. If you want to build a game that's structured around something, you can't go wrong with the tarot. right? So
Yeah.
a website that I highly recommend. I'm going to warn you now, it's very ugly because they haven't updated it since the 90s or something. But it's learntarot.com. And they break down each of the tarot cards according to just the keywords and the ideas. Like when I'm also a professional tarot reader, and when I was teaching students, I'd say this is a good source to go to. It's still one of the best, no matter what kind of books you can buy on the subject. So it's really fun. Like if you decide to, I want to build an oracle based on the tarot, you just have to look at what the original meaning of that card is, and then you can, because the tarot is meant to cover so many archetypes and so many things that can happen in your life. So it's a really good baseline to, and no one will know. Everyone will think you're amazing and you came up with it all by yourself. So.
My most recent Wretched and Alone game, the wonderful discovery of witches, is about witch trials, and that's the first game I've written based on that uses the tarot, and that's the website I use for it, and it's probably the easiest game I've ever written in my life because
it's so good, right?
Yeah, the site told me what all the cards mean, and then I just plugged in the themes to them, and that was it, and done.
I think this is something we're starting to see a little bit more coming into play with Spindle Wheel, for example, coming out, where we're seeing game-specific or TTRPG-specific tarot decks starting to be developed. I've always been interested in this. There've been for quite a few years. There's been a number of story writing decks.
Yeah.
I've got quite a few. I've kickstarted some in the past. The Story Forge, I think, was one of them. Anyway, and they're kind of like that. They have typical tarot spreads, but they'll be like the hero's journey or character's backstory or something like that. It's got the prompts and the cards tell you kind of what they mean. But it's kind of exciting to see stuff that's a little bit more interpretive coming out, like Spindle Wheel, for example, where you have some words and some prompts, so it's not completely like a tarot deck where you've got to kind of know the meaning or kind of decipher the meaning. But yeah, I think it's an interesting space. I'm really quite excited to see what we continue to see as a kind of solo gaming and oracles, like the attention on oracles continues to grow. Because I just love cards.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't live in the US, so the drive-through RPG on-demand card scene is terrible for all of us except Tana, of course. Actually, just thinking about it.
I would love to see tarot cards and oracle cards like that make their way to role-playing in this way, because in the super early days of Mythic, before it became Mythic, Mythic really is like the 10th or 11th version of the game system that went through a lot of iterations. One of those iterations was a tarot card phase, because I originally thought, well, if I'm trying to get a GM to give you answers, that has already been solved. Tarot decks, right?
Yeah.
It was just very slow, but ultimately it did make its way into Mythic, because all the meaning tables, all those words come directly from tarot decks, because tarot decks have already taken life experience, try to round it out and cover all the bases.
Yeah, that's true.
I would love to see someone make an actual tarot deck for oracle play that works with role-playing games, and I think we're going to see it. I don't know if it's been done yet, but I would love to see that.
I've spoken to an artist to do it for my own game. It's just not cheap if you're not an artist yourself.
No, and the problem is going to be how to make it move quickly, because the very nature of tarot is that you interpret, and it takes time and it takes thought. And if you're at a game table with other players, time is not completely at your leisure. But if someone can solve that problem, it's going to be an amazing product.
I think from my own perspective, the challenge for me is, if you want something open-ended that can be used, which I think, Tana, for you is probably what you're more interested in, as creating tools that can be used in a lot of different applications. What I was looking at was something very tailored to the game I'm working on, and therefore the imagery and the terminology, which I was looking at. Actually, I was also looking at learntarot.com. Looking at the imagery was how do I take sorry, not the imagery, but the meanings, taking those and applying them to my setting specifically for that game. And I think this is where I'm kind of going, is it'd be interesting to see how, if we get tailored tarot decks that are kind of setting specific, and then also whether we get I think Spindle Wheel is kind of almost like halfway there, with having something very, very generic that's that can be used in a lot of different ways. But yeah,
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I want to ask you, Jammi, since you're a professional tarot reader, how do you solve the problem of an interpretive tarot deck and making it move quickly? Like, what would your take be on that?
Yeah, oh my gosh, I was about to get into that, but thank you for reading my mind, Tana. But for sure, like, because when I teach a class, there really is that inner voice, right, that says, oh, I don't know what this means, this is difficult, or I have to, like, when I first learned the tarot, I did it the hard way. I memorized it, which took forever because it's 78 cards and it's like, I don't know, 3 to 4. I memorized learntarot.com basically. That's what I was trying to do. I had it on my PDA. Do you remember when we had PDAs? But anyway, I had it on that thing. But what I started to notice later, because I've been reading for like about, I think it's close to, I want to say close to 20 years now. So like later on when I started to do it more intuitively, like I started going by color. Like one of the amazing things that I saw another tarot reader do when I was younger was they would say like, oh, the Queen of Cups, you know, she's facing towards the King of Wands. And so the two of them are having this like problem and confrontation. It's between these two. And I was like, oh, that makes so much. So helping people just read things visually based on color and then going with their archetypal intuitive understanding of it. So every time I write a tarot game, I try to remind people just to go ahead and say the first few words, because it's true as a tarot reader, like when I read the tarot, I never know the full sentence, right? I just start saying the first few words and then the rest comes out. So you're just trying to allow the intuition to just bypass your brain and go straight to your mouth, which also helps me as a GM. So like it would go back and forth between those two things. But definitely, I'd love to see, I think for now we have to like guide people to just be okay with just saying whatever comes out first. And I think would also help with solo play, right? Like just being confident and just getting the thought out there. And then from that, I'm hoping that with games like Spindle Wheel, it'll get people used to the idea. Like the first few times are awkward, but I do have a game called Their Love Destroyed This Land, not a cheery game by any means, and people have played it solo, but basically it's a tarot game where you pull cards and then you interpret just based on what the cards look like. And I've run the game, facilitated the game for lots of new people who've never read the tarot, who've never played an RPG before, never played a story game. And after a while, they really get it. Like it just starts to flow and they get into it. So I think there's so much potential in tarot. That's why I love writing all these different tarot games. Because it really, the key is just the tarot is only a tool to connect to your intuition, right? And so the tarot is just so useful because it goes through all those archetypes, but the most important part is your intuition, basically. So yeah, but I agree with Matt that there's a lot of potential in Spindle Wheel and stuff like it for sure.
There's a game that I've been playtesting recently, which I think is out now by Becky Anderson, called Wretched. And that uses
that looks so interesting.
It's so good, and it uses a normal deck of playing cards, but it also uses tarot spreads. And you physically alter the cards as you play the game, because it's all about trapping demons in the cards of your deck. And what I found with that was that, because I read tarot maybe 20 years ago when I was like in my late teens, but I haven't touched it for a long time. And initially it was very slow trying to figure out the spreads and stuff because I didn't remember any of it, and trying to, looking up what the cards are and the oracle. But then the more you play it and the more you alter the cards, the more they take on very, very personal meanings for you, and reading them gets faster and faster and faster because you've basically built the oracle yourself through play.
Wow, that's so
and
cool.
I think it's a really, really interesting design space. It's a game that I think everyone should check out because it's designed for solo play, but also, like, Becky posted me one of her cards that had a dangerous demon in it to look after until she can have it back. So it's also got this built-in, like, real-world distance, like, epistolary play that I really love. Yeah, everyone should check out Wretched if you're into solo games because it's fantastic.
I'll put a link. Really cool I'll put a link in the comments or in the description when this is done. Cool. Peter, I kind of want to ask you about this as well because I know that you there's oracles in all of your kind of your game supplements. And
there is. Yeah, go on, finish.
oh, it's just the kind of how do you go about like choosing what goes in them? What are some kind of classic do's and don'ts, or you know, little tips and tricks for when you're coming up with yours? Because you've obviously created, as you said before, 47, I think you said, kind of solo engines for games that are already out there. And I've got a few of, I think I've got like 3 of them for games that I have, and the oracles are all different, and quite clearly, or they look different anyway. Like I imagine that you're kind of tailoring them for the game that you're playing.
I'm trying
What's
to
the
be
process?
invisible.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be invisible. Yeah, I want my little booklets to get out the way. They shouldn't be between you and your playing. So if you're playing something that's Mutant Year Zero or Zero Engine based, then I'm looking at what the game gives you. It's normally the special dice, or the different, the way the dice moves work, and the mechanics. And I think, okay, I know what I want to achieve. We want to achieve those yes/no answers, or we want to achieve something with more meaning. These are the dice I've got. So how can I make these dice do that work with the minimum of fuss and the minimum of thinking? You should be using your brain for the creating, not looking up my answers in a book. I try and get people off book as much as they possibly can. So often you don't need my little book at all. You can just kind of, once you know the answers, like knowing a tarot card in meanings, once you know those the values, you don't really need most of them. But yeah, I just try and get out the way. It's not about me, and it's not about the little booklet. It's not about the rules. It's about the game and the character and the experience, and learning their story, discovering their story. So yeah, everything I do is to try and be as kind of as light touch and as invisible as possible.
Okay.
So that's what I'm trying to do.
Cool.
So for the classic do's and don'ts, it's don't make it all about you. It should be all about the player and the character.
Cool. All right. Should we move on to the next question? I think we'll jump into, just looking at the time, we've got like 25-ish minutes, 20-ish minutes. Let's jump to the questions that are kind of a bit more about you yourselves. And one of the ones I kind of was kind of interested in we've kind of delved into this a little bit with some of you, where you've been giving shouting out other games that people have been creating. But Jacques Turgot on MeWe wanted to ask what your favorite solo products are written by others, and also your favorite non-solo products. So if we can kind of get maybe one of each from each of you, that would be kind of cool. Whoever wants to start.
No,
I'll
I'm gonna
start.
jump. What? Go ahead.
Oh, go, no, ladies first. Go on.
Okay. I was, it's already been said, but it's kind of interesting with this past year with quarantines and whatnot. But with, I would say, Ironshorn's appearance on in the industry and the field, it has made a big splash, and I would say it's probably pushed the profile of solo playing up more than anything else in the last year or two. So, and honestly, it's a beautiful product. It's just beautiful. So that definitely would be my favorite other product out there for myself.
Okay, cool. And what about a non-solo product?
I am such a geek. No, I am such a geek. I love this. I love tables. I love random tables. I just do. And no one does random tables. And I'm just so old school. But all those Palladium games, the Palladium, the Rifts and all this. Mm-hmm. I love the fact that the game unabashedly and their whole line has not evolved or advanced a bit in like 30 years. And that's such like a horrible thing to say, right? But I love the fact that there's this giant mass of pure gaming gold books and books of random tables is glorious. I love to play Palladium games, so yeah, that's my favorite non-solo product. It's a whole mask product.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's slightly cheating, but you know, we'll accept it.
My favorite non-game is every game out there.
Peter, you were starting to say something too. Did you want to?
Yeah, my favorite solo product at the moment is Tilt by Alex Yari, which is the one where I discovered the cut-ups. You know, I thought I knew what I was doing until I read that. So yeah, that's Tilt would be my favorite solo product at the moment.
And what about
non-solo? Not non-solo. Well, a bit like you should say random tables. Azuku Games. They just do you know, thousands of. I think there's 444 different sort of little booklets of like D100 tables or random tables. There's something, you know, whatever you need. There's something in there. So yeah, any of his random tables.
Cool. Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I want to go before someone takes my recommendation, just in case I'm worried. So in terms of, so it's super hard to choose a favorite game. So just, I'm going to preface this and say favorite game of the moment, just to cover, you know, as a disclaimer. But my favorite solo game of the moment is 1,000-Year-Old Vampire. It's a really beautiful book. I think it's a really good introduction to the journaling. I'm so sad I can't get a physical copy because mailing anything to the Philippines is hard most of the time, but during the year of our Lord 2020, it's even harder. Oh, I'm so jealous, Chris. You have to throw it in. Such a gorgeous book. It's so gorgeous. But the reason why I really love it is it's a journaling game, but there's enough of like a rule set that you can latch on to. Like if you have experience with role-playing games, there's a really good structure. And there's this really haunting idea of you cannot hold on to all of your memories as a vampire because you've just lived for so long. And it really resonates with me on a personal level because I have temporal lobe epilepsy. So I also don't have a lot of my memories. Like most of my childhood is like basically gone, and some other things. So I really resonate with this vampire in a way that's really fun to play out. I really enjoy it. And then in terms of like non-solo RPG, once again, disclaimer, this is just my current favorite, blah, 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 very difficult. But I think I'm going to tie it in because I did bring up the game earlier, and I think it ties into the idea of learning how to play intuitively and really leaning into interesting structure. So I have to recommend Bluebeard's Bride by Magpie Games. I ran it again recently, and it's so interesting because the book tells you as a GM, you shouldn't plan anything. And you just build Bluebeard's haunted mansion based on the bride that the players create together. And it feels related to solo RPGs because all of the players who gather are playing just one character. They are playing the bride and they're playing different aspects of her. Like either they're playing the Batal or the Virgin or the Witch or the Mother or the Animus. So I feel like it has a lot with solo RPGs. There's also like moves that you don't have to roll for that you just get answers to. It's a very structured, I like to call it a point and click adventure horror game. That's what Bluebeard's Bride feels like, is you're meant to investigate objects and go towards a tragic ending of your own making. So I highly recommend it. I feel like it's the kind of game where it'll teach you to be a more intuitive GM and player. It'll teach you new ways to look at RPGs through structure. And I think it'll help you as a solo RPG player too.
Cool. Cool, thanks. John or Chris?
So I was going to say 1,000-Year-Old Vampire.
I knew it. That's why I went there. I was like, I can tell, Chris.
And I've already talked about Wreck This Deck. So I think favorite solo game at the moment, I have the same problem as Jammi, that I play a lot of games. So both of these are at the moment. Favorite solo game at the moment would be Artifact by Mousehole Press.
I was going to say that too. I was
So
going to go
good.
between. Yeah.
It's great. Just a really nice solo game about charting the life of a magic item of some kind. It was really influential for me when I was writing Go Alone. And it's just a really nice game to play, and it's a game that also helps you generate content for other games. So you can, like, say you're playing a fantasy role-playing game with dragons, you can spend an hour or two on your own creating the history of this magic item and then drop it into your game, and it's got this whole like depth of story to it that you wouldn't otherwise get, which is great. And favorite non-solo game at the moment, probably Brindlewood Bay.
Oh, that's so good. It's a good one.
Yeah, one of my favorite. It's a real love letter to PBTA. I think it's obviously like Jason obviously just adores those kind of games, and it shows, and it does a lot of really cool things with the system. The method for resolving mysteries without, as a GM, knowing anything about what the solution to the mystery is a really elegant piece of design, and I think it's something that you could apply to solo games really well. If you're writing a solo role-playing game about solving mysteries, I think you could probably steal the clue system and the theorize move entirely and have a workable game. It's just a really great piece of design. It's a really great game to play, and it's really soft and warm game. It makes you feel nice about the world and yourself. So definitely check out Brindlewood Bay.
Except for the murders and the Cthulhu part.
For the
I
murders
feel
and
like
the
you should,
Cthulhu.
actually, we
Yeah.
should mention that.
Yeah. There are some murders, there are some eldritch horrors, but you also are little old ladies solving crime and running a book club. So
It's a very good game.
It's a beautiful game.
I've ran like 16 sessions of it already because it's so good.
Yeah, it's great.
Cool. John?
Well, favorite solo products. Well, I assume the games from the people in the chat are off limits. Otherwise, it would be boring, I think, and otherwise it would be Mythic. But I think my favorite solo product would be the Recluse Solo engine, which is, I think, one of the nicest oracles because it takes away player presuppositions. So you have a supposition as a player, and the oracle is kind of designed to sometimes take away the presupposed ideas that the player has. So it really plays around with your expectations and kind of surprises you at every turn. Also, what I'm playing at the moment, let me see. Scherzo by Tem H, which was a really nice, fun OSR type, swingy, dramatic game, also suitable for 2 players, which I like to do with my children. And as far as favorite non-solo products, well, I guess these I steal these from my daughter. They're like I don't know if you can see them, but they're like really imaginative, fun, fairy inspired cards that are just chock full of interesting ideas, like the one I'm looking at now. It's a fairy king who's being whispered to by his advisor while a court jester is dancing in front of him, while a mouse is running around with papers, and a letter is delivered to the king. So it's just chock full of little tidbits you can use during a solo game.
Are those similar to like Story World cards, something like that?
Well, I bought it quite a while ago, but I'm afraid my daughter
Packaging is
lost.
gone.
She lost everything that even resembles rules. So I'm only left with I think part of the deck. So
that reminds me, I was given by one of my gaming groups back in the UK before I left the UK many years ago. For my birthday, one of my gaming groups bought me a kind of board/card game called Dixit. Which is
That
very,
works
very
really
cool.
well.
Like that's also takes the idea of tarot, but goes in an absolute sort of abstract, zany direction, and that's a lot of fun. And anyway.
Have you heard of Mysterium? Like that one is
No.
another board game that.
Write
So
that
it's
down.
also a board game that uses an oracle deck. It's a little more structured because
Okay.
one person is playing the ghost, and they can only communicate in dreams, and that's what they give as cards. And everyone
Okay.
else, they're playing as psychics, and they're trying to figure out who killed them with what weapon in what room. So it's kind of like Cluedo
interesting.
mixed with. Yeah, but the reason I bring up both Mysterium in relation to Dixit is I've used both those decks in professional readings and they both work
Oh, wow. Cool.
really
Okay.
well.
Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. We'll keep going. We've got about another 10 minutes. So if anybody in chat, we've gone through actually all of my green high priority questions, which is good. We can keep going with some of the kind of the medium priority ones that I've kind of highlighted. But if anybody in chat has any like pressing questions, now is the time to start asking them before we start to wrap up. Kind of sticking with this theme of questions for the panel. I'm just kind of looking at that list there. The next one is like, what are your favorite random tables? And I'm kind of asking this because there's been a bit of a discussion just in that last question about, I know Tana's basically said you love Palladium's, random tables and stuff. What makes if I can maybe rephrase that slightly, this is from Zaurish9 on Reddit, but yeah, what makes a good random table, or what is it? Can you pick a random table out that you really, really enjoy?
Anything by Zedek is incredible.
Oh yeah, really good stuff.
Yeah, I think the OSR for me, I've only recently started to appreciate the OSR because I always thought it was a bunch of kind of middle-aged men wanting to play D&D, and I'm not a big D&D fan myself. I never played D&D growing up either. I started with a different game, and looking at the random tables that come out of, basically the random tables that come out of the OSR, it's just kind of like, wow, the creativity in there is incredible, absolutely incredible. Yeah. Anyway.
I really like random tables, but I think one of the most inspiring table I've come across is a really, really simple one by I think it's Abominable Fancy, the blog. It's the simplest weather table, if I'm not mistaken. And it takes a state. So you have to think of day one, what is a typical weather situation for the season and the location. And then whatever image of the weather pops into your head is the weather state of where you start. And then you roll. And like 1 is like terrible weather, and then 2 is worse than yesterday, and 3 is the same as yesterday, 4 is the same as yesterday, and 5 better than yesterday, and then really great weather. So it's a table that takes the state and plays around with it, with the state that you interpret in the beginning, and then comes around back sometimes like a kind of Markov chain. And I think that's really, if I condense a table down to like an art form, that's really close to it, I think. For me, yeah.
Anyone else have any random tables they're particularly keen on?
I will say that Wander Home is a game that had a really successful Kickstarter earlier this year, and it's known as a belonging anti-belonging inspired game, and all of this as a story game. But honestly, when I read through it, I got lucky enough to read an early version because I'm on as a contributor. There were like a lot of interesting random tables, and Jay Dragon, the creator, admitted to me that a huge inspiration was the OSR scene. And so I think Jamie got a real big kick out of putting OSR in a BOB game. So, I really like the tables because it really helps create it's a game about anthropomorphic beings who are just wandering. Like the whole point is you just go from place to place. You're not really meant to build a story, more you're really meant to experience the world as it is. And so there are all these random tables to help build up those places that you come across, and it really creates this beautiful singular journey. And I think it just has really beautiful subtle tables that really evoke so much, and those are the hardest to write, I think, right? Like really simple tables that really inspire you. So Wander Home is my favorite.
Cool. All right, we'll take another question from the list. we've covered some of these, so that's why I'm just taking a minute to kind of read through ones that we haven't really touched on yet. Big T-Bomb on Reddit asks, what are some private rules you use in play? Things too discreet or perhaps specific to be published or recommended as official rules? I think it's an interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting question. There's a kind of an assumption built into there that that solo play is very tied to rules.
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah. I wanna say my personal rule is there are no rules, that I can throw out anything at any time and cheat a little if I want to, and no one's looking. But I'm also one of those people where if I'm playing chess and if I can get away with like moving a piece without anyone noticing, I will sometimes do that with friends. So that's where I'm coming from. But
Wow.
but yeah, I haven't been able to do it successfully in a long time. So they've all caught on by now. But
Yeah, I don't think there are really rules like that for me, at least. But there is a mechanic I like to use that would be really hard to put into any game or any book. I think it's when I'm stuck, I sometimes like to ask my children, hey, when I think of this, what do you think of? And then I'll use that as input. Also on the Mythic GME Discord, that we have a human oracle channel, so you can use other people's input on your based on your prompts, which really opens up your your headspace and your creativity, because other people have way different like symbolisms and ways to interpret them based on their own life experiences, which I think is really fun to do.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah.
That would be hard to put into writing, I think, or put into a game.
Yeah, definitely.
for sure.
There's a school of thought that is that says that games are just permission to play and permission to imagine, and that the rules don't actually matter. And I'm not saying that I agree or disagree with that, because if I agreed with that, I'd be out of a job. But it's definitely something I take on board when I'm playing. If you get really into a session, you can go, especially with other people, you can go for hours without consulting the rules, especially if you're playing a more story-heavy game. And I do like to think of rules as just a tool to facilitate play rather than as something hard and fast. You don't necessarily put that in the book because nobody would buy it.
Yeah.
Wait, what do I need these rules for exactly? Wait, hold on. What are you saying?
Why do I need this?
Yeah, I really do love structure and rules and all of those things. But yeah, Chris, I agree. I think as a designer, what I'm really doing is giving people permission. And, as long as everyone is having fun, I don't mind if they, my favorite games are like in Masks, where they say, well, if you want to do something else, I'm not there at your table to tell you that you can't do that. So as long as you're having fun, right? So
I think this is, I think why random tables, like we were talking about, is so good, because a large portion of what a rule set or a game is, for me at least, is to give you ideas that you wouldn't have yourself. That.
Cool. We're almost out of time. There was one question in the chat, which it was actually being answered by chat, so I'm not sure if it was a question for the panel or just a something to spark conversation. But it's from Russell Alerts. There, it says, "Does anyone use solo play for world building?" And I think that's an interesting one, because I've come across a product, it's also just been mentioned, called Ex Novo, which was on itch in the racial equality bundle, which was absolutely incredible anyway. And yeah, what are your thoughts on using solo play for world building?
I do it all the time.
Yeah.
And in what, like, do you use oracles for that? Like, what's the kind of process that you use it for? Sorry, Tana.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's a brilliant thing to do. And it gets back to something I was saying earlier about pulling the camera back, how questions in an oracle don't need to be about tiny specific things. It could be about big, huge world issue things. What kind of country does your character live in? What kind of state is it in? What kind of history has it had? What was your character's family like? What was the, all these kind of, anything you can imagine is perfect for world building. And it makes it so much more organic when you finally drop a character in there. Just, getting away from getting too specific with your questions. Yeah, honestly, I love it. I don't start a game without asking basic questions about my character's world and creating the world first. And then it's all done with the Oracle.
Yeah. Like, I really love the idea of using games to be able to play other games and then see other aspects of that world through another game, so on and so forth. I have this experiment with the campaign right now where we're going back and forth between 3 different games that exist within one world, which is Brinkwood, another one of my favorite games. But so, for example, in Their Love Destroyed This Land, it's a game where you create a map, where you create a land, and then eventually you have to sort of destroy aspects of it. And all that you're left with is like the forgotten gods who want to fade away and, parts of it. And then so I played that with the group, and then we took that same place and I put it in a game that we were playing right after. And all the players were like, oh my gosh, like I helped create this land that we destroyed and now we are, so it was very cool, like what Tana's talking about, that overall big picture, and then going in onto the very personal level and creating this like rich history. And you did it through fun, right? Instead of just like being a GM on your own, creating all of this by yourself. So, but solo RPGs are also an excellent way of doing that. I do like to joke that solo RPGs aren't really solo, because you get to spend time with the designer and the creator, and it's just the two of you hanging out, making a game together. So yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, if you're using the Oracle for the world building, the questions you ask are going to be the things that are important to you or to the game you want to play. So you'll end up with a world that is kind of tailor-made, but not necessarily what you want. If the Oracle just goes against you, the issues will all be what you were looking for, but what the state it's in might be far from it. But it will still be focused on what you care about. So no, I can just do sort of like half a dozen yes/no questions, and the fact that I'm asking the question already tells me kind of where I want to go with it. So yeah, I use oracles for world building all the time.
I think
much faster than reading huge, great source books.
I think there's a really interesting design space happening right now within the industry, which is about games that are lightly detailing setting, like Ironsworn with its truths about the different regions and the truths of the setting. I've just finished reviewing for the podcast that I run a game called Electric Bastion Land, which is incredible, and it has quite a rich, zany setting, which is so open-ended it can be whatever you want it to be, but also interprets that sort of interpretation. And I think I'm also very excited to see what that seems to be a trend that is slowly starting to pick up a little bit more. And some of my favorite games are games with really deep settings where you have to read like big fat source books, Warhammer Fantasy, for example, or Symbaroum or Coriolis. Like these all have massive books of setting, like you said, Peter, where you feel like you want to know what the world's about, and you have to just read and read and read, and it's so much more exciting to put your own stamp on it, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, we're out of time, so I know for some of us, like it's 1 a.m. for me here in Germany, and for some of you it's the beginning of the day or middle of the day, but we're out of time. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. It was really good to have you all on and to pick your brains. And hopefully there's a lot of use to, there's definitely a lot of really good conversation going on in chat. So thank you everyone for staying and getting involved in that. And yeah, I think I'd like to do another roundtable in the future. I don't know about guest makeup or anything like that, whether I'll be trying to mix it up a bit, inviting all of you back again, or maybe looking at specific topics. But yeah, if you like this, then please leave a comment in the comments below, because that'd be really good to kind of get some feedback on, even if you've got ideas for maybe some more focused topics for future roundtables, that'd be really cool. As the YouTuber, obviously, like, subscribe, all the rest of that gubbins helps grow the channel. And otherwise, just once more, thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time and coming on. It's been
yeah,
really
thanks
great.
for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone. And catch you next time, I guess.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.